So Future Retail Disruption, it's our annual flagship publication, and it's all about what is going to drive change in the industry. And then given that, what assumptions should you make about the future, and what capabilities then do you need to build out or enhance to win?
Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast. I am your host, Emma Irwin, Brand Marketing Manager at Flywheel, and as you just heard, today we are talking about the annual Future Retail Disruption Report that Flywheel's Retail Insights team has just published. This report is readily available for Retail Insights subscribers, and if you're not currently subscribed, hopefully this episode inspires you to do so that you can dig into everything we don't get to cover. Okay, I'll break down what you'll get from this episode right after we meet our guest.
Thanks for having me back. I'm Hannah Donoghue. I'm our SVP of Consulting here at Flywheel. I have responsibility for our consulting, retail insights, and custom client analytics organizations. And our retail insights team put together this report that we're here to talk about today.
Amazing. And as always, I'm going to ask you for the last thing you purchased on, honestly, it can be anywhere. The last thing you've purchased online. I have a feeling it's likely Amazon, but it could be anywhere.
We just got our subscribe and save order, so there's quite a bit that was in there. But outside of that, I purchased another box of mac and cheese because I didn't buy the right characters the first time around. We needed to have multiple characters. So we have all of them, and hopefully we'll be stocked for a little while.
Incredible. I loved it. But I remember being a kid and there were some, we were a Kraft mac and cheese box family. There are some that slap and there are some that don't slap and they feel weird in your mouth.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we have each boy wants different ones. They're at different ages and they've got their thoughts and it's all right. It works.
All right. The Future Retail Disruption Report is one of our flagship reports that breaks down what is going to change the industry in the near future. We identify the key drivers of change we see, all 32 of them, and then build assumptions around how we think these drivers will change retail so that brands and retailers have tangible scenarios to prepare and build for. We're going to highlight a few major drivers of change that can't be ignored, and then we'll walk through our assumptions across shoppers, retailers, and brands. First up, we need to talk about STEEP, which is the grounding framework of this report. I'll let Hannah take it from here.
So STEEP is a framework that we've used to identify drivers of change. STEEP stands for Society, Technology, Economy, Industry, and Policy. What we find when we're looking at what's going to cause the major disruption, they tend to come from one of those 5 areas. And so it's been a nice grounding way to organize around sort of future back thinking. If you want to think about a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what could look different and what's going to drive the change, it's a way to organize your thinking and find those drivers that we believe will cause the most disruption. And so that sort of sits at the core of our report. And we'll talk through in the report each of the different areas and the top drivers that sit within those sort of pillars.
Perfect. All right, this report, it highlights 32 drivers of change across all of those different categories. And I think we would need a week of just being continuously on a recording to get through all of them, which is my encouragement for people to just go read the report. But I'm going to have you, are there however many top drivers, if you had to pick, that stand out to you as the biggest forces shaping what's next in retail?
So, I mean, there are ones in the technology pillar that I don't think will surprise anyone. Within those, I would call out AI-driven retail, not a shocker there. Data clean rooms in particular with measurement capabilities, retail concentration from an industry standpoint, how that's shifting. And then I would say between societal and economy, one of the ones, I'm going to cheat a little because it's a couple of drivers coming together. But if you think about sort of the aging population, pair that with generational shifts and then transfers of wealth from an economic perspective, that's one that I think can really drive a big change, especially if you take a global view and look at markets across all different development stages.
Are there any drivers that you think the industry in general is underestimating?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things there. I do think a lot of people are, they love to talk about Gen Z or Gen Alpha or millennials or whomever. But I do think it's really important at a country level to understand the generational shifts and dynamics. We look at, I saw a stat recently that was like by 2030, 57% of spend will be driven by digital natives. So at millennials and anyone after. That creates very different shopping dynamics, as we've already seen, but that's only going to further accelerate. The other thing that we look at that I've always loved is we look at what's called the dependency ratio, which is essentially the number of dependents, so those that are not in the workforce, compared to those of working age. And what's interesting, again, taking this future retail disruption is from a global lens. Like, it is intended to look at countries across all different development stages. You take a country like Japan, where the dependency ratio is already close to 50%, and many other developed markets are already hovering between 30 to 40%. When the dependency ratios start getting up that high, it creates really different shopping habits. It creates different household structures. It creates different dynamics on what people are buying. And so, yes, it is all about Gen Alpha, et cetera, and the younger generations coming up. But it's equally about household structures and dynamics look like in an aging population when you have a dependency ratio like that. So that's one that it's talked about a lot, but I think there's a lot of nuances that get overlooked. The other thing that I would say in terms of just, are there things that are overhyped? Part of this report is intended to cut out the noise of what are the things that don't really matter or aren't going to have a lasting impact. There are some drivers that I would say are more short term. And when I say short term, I'm talking, 1 to 3 years. Others will take, much longer. And so what we try and do in the report is split those drivers out and help our readers prioritize them into 3 different buckets. Those that require action now, ones that are going to be immediately disruptive, that if you don't start addressing them right away and you don't start sort of tackling those capabilities, you're going to miss short-term investment opportunities as well as potentially fall further behind. Then you have the other 2 groups, which are prioritize and monitor. Both of those may be a little bit slower coming in, but the prioritized ones, you need to dedicate some resource to really mid to long-term changes. And then lastly, on the monitor side, it's really about testing and learning, ones that we think could have a profound impact, but might take a while longer to actually show up in the market.
Do you have an example of one driver per each of those buckets? Like, do something now, prioritize, monitor.
If I were to just take the society pillar and think about different examples within those 3, you could take social connections. That's one that is easily requiring action now in the way that consumers are engaging, consuming content, shopping online. If I were to go into sort of that prioritized bucket, you have things like potentially sustainability tensions or shifting health habits. Very important to prioritize and act on them. But we're still seeing those take a little bit longer to actually really, really show up in the market. And then the last one would be more from a monitor standpoint, would be more of the evolving household structure and dynamics, because that does take longer to play out. Again, it's very important. And if you look at some developing markets, the household structures are going to change drastically, but that doesn't happen overnight. And so that would be one that we would look at and say, don't lose sight of it, pay attention, but maybe test and learn a little bit today because the impact isn't going to hit for quite some time.
Now that we've covered some of the 32 drivers of change highlighted in the report, we can start talking about the assumptions across shoppers, retailers, and brands. But what do we really mean by assumptions? I promise I know what the word assumptions means. I just want to know how we're using it here.
When we go through our sort of strategic planning with a lot of our partners, we start with the drivers and then we take a future back approach to planning. So we say, if these drivers land, if some of the ones that we just talked about land, what would be true? What would the environment look like if this really lands as hard as it potentially could? If this comes to fruition in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, what will be different about the operating context when this driver actually lands? And that's what we call our assumptions. So we create that base for our partners to think about how they might work future back. So many of our partners, rightly so, are really focused on the day-to-day tactics because they have to land the numbers in the quarter, in the month, in the quarter, in the year. At the same time, though, if they're not thinking out about what's going to change, they can miss it and get behind the curve of building the capabilities that are going to take some time. So we work our assumptions to give them a view of what the future operating context will look like, what they can assume from a shopper, retailer, and brand perspective. And then we work our way from there to say, if this operating context comes to fruition, what capabilities do you need? Where are your gaps? Where are your strengths today on those? And what's the pathway that we can work on together to get you ready for a world where those assumptions all land?
Let's keep things rolling by talking about our shopper assumptions.
For shoppers, there were a couple core things that really came out of the report this year. One was an increased emphasis around social discovery and connection. And I know when you and I last spoke on one of the previous podcasts, we were talking a lot about social and how it was a trend to follow for 2025. I think it's still very important. And I don't want to say it's at its infancy, but there's still so much room to go and room to grow as it becomes more mainstream commerce and just ways of operating. But it still has some complexity and nuances to it that need to understand. So anyways, from a shopper standpoint, I would say we really spotlighted social discovery and connection as a first one. Then the second one was more so around AI-enabled mass personalization. And then consumers making different value-driven choices and a focus more on affordability. You think about the sort of economic uncertainty, some of the policy things that you mentioned earlier, and consumers are making trade-offs around value.
What is something like tactical we can say to brands in terms of this is what we think is going to happen? Here's how you look about this. Because as you said, it's growing and almost anything can happen. But like, how do we tangentialize?
What do we actually do?
Yeah. What do we do?
I think and we know this, shoppers are really relying more on influencer and creator-driven content. They're looking for authenticity. Brands need to start figuring out who those partners and content creators are, but it's such a massive space and there's so many to unpick. And that's why it's helpful to have partners to support you on that journey so that you make sure you choose the right content creators that are aligned with your brand, whose audiences are aligned with the consumers that you're targeting. And then I think you can think about that as it relates to your own content and how do you use those assets sort of in more places. But we are, as brand partners, we really need to be thinking more and more about how we are leveraging social platforms for not just discovery, but also ultimately commerce.
AI-enabled mass personalization. What do we mean by that? Is that at like the brand level? Are these not agents, but like AI tools that are helping drive personalization across the brands that people are shopping for?
Yeah. So I think what it is consumers are expecting, given AI and AI's capabilities now, which obviously expand and increase every day, consumers are expecting a much more personalized experience and relevant experience for them. We'll tie that later in sort of one of our brand capabilities or brand assumptions. But it is really about how do you serve up the right thing at the right time, the right ad, the right experience for that consumer. The mass personalization piece comes from, it was really hard to actually personalize at scale in previous years. But now with AI and other capabilities, layer on data clean rooms and targeting audiences more precisely, brands are closer and retailers are closer to being able to do that. But it all comes from a shopper expectation of really relevant experiences for them that speak to their values, their priorities.
Got it. Okay. Next one. Essentially looking at things like affordability, sustainability, and I think even changing household structures kind of fit into these just overarching themes that are driving change. If I'm a brand and I hear, okay, I need to be focusing on affordability, sustainability, and a future household structure change. How do I think about like prioritizing those? Is there a ranking system? How do I go about thinking about all of these things for the future in one go?
Yeah, it's a lot. Look, the reality is, depending on the category of which you're operating in, not all of these are going to impact your industry the same way. And so when we write this report, we write it for the totality of the industry. When we're working with our partners or when we're making recommendations to them on how can they think about actually prioritizing and putting these into place. I'll take, if we're working with one of our brand partners, what we'll often say is take your brand hat off for a moment and think about as if you were your retailer partner. which of those are going to matter the most to them, which are going to drive their business in a different way. And we encourage them to split into little groups and think about different retailer partners, different channels of distribution. That gets them to, we have them say, okay, if you're this retailer, what are the 5 most important drivers for you that are going to drive the most change for this retailer partner? And then we have them look across all the different retailer partners that they broke into and see where are the commonalities. What you'll find is that there does tend to be a lot of overlap and some unique distinctions in one channel or another. Obviously, you take something like value conscious consumers, and the reactions from those are going to look different in a discounter channel as a really basic example. But we have them take that. So they now sort of understand what drivers are going to be the most important to them. That gets them to a prioritized list. Then they can put their brand hat back on and say, okay, if we know this is what our retailer partners are going to be thinking about, what do we need to do differently to focus on these? We recommend that brands look at this list at least once a year. The best ones that we see that we're working with are typically reviewing it and checking it quarterly. If you're checking it quarterly, it's a much shorter exercise because you're looking at, some of them it's like check, that hasn't changed. It's a much longer term driver. Others, shorter term, you might want to be looking at a little more frequently. And so that's how we help them really think about and prioritize it.
And of course, next up, our retailer assumptions.
For this one, it was all around seamless, unified experiences. So things like obviously connecting online and offline, but also having more closed loop measurement and data capabilities now that retailers are able to marry those together. The second was all around future of retail media networks and data clean rooms. I know we could talk about that forever, but that obviously is a core one. And the last was really around the evolution of ecosystem models. So we talk about retailers operating as an ecosystem where commerce, or actually, selling products, is just one vertical, but they have all these other aspects of their business model and what they bring to life for their partners. They're monetizing those differently. They're prioritizing those differently, and will continue to. So those were our 3 focus areas for retailers.
Gotcha. I'd love a slightly more expanded answer on the unified and connected shopper experience and building that. When I read that, it's like, obviously every retailer wants to develop a unified and connected shopper experience. You have to, if you want to get people going and walking in your doors and staying there. But there's also so many options of different retailers for people to be buying things from. How do you think about balancing how much you invest there versus how much you say, oh, but maybe the majority of my shoppers come in for 3 items. Is this actually worth all of this technology investment?
I think even before you get to the tech investment, it's about the org design. It really starts with organizational design. Are teams aligned around shared goals? Do budget responsibility and accountability sit in the right place? Do we have unified metrics? That starts and sort of lays the foundation for, can you actually execute on this sort of unified or, just commerce experience? So I think that sort of starts first and foremost, where yes, it requires investment, it requires change management and things like that. But that, I think, sits at the core and the foundation. From there, I think it is worth the investment because the leaders are going to invest in it. Now, not every retailer will be able to invest in it to the same degree and same scale. So they need to understand their consumers and what matters to them. But for a lot of the top leading retailers, yeah, they will need to have clarity over their retail media network, their data and measurement capabilities, and how they allow brands to leverage that data and to make smarter decisions that ultimately help them and create a better experience for their consumers. So yeah, I do think it is worth it. Yes, there are some consumers where it perhaps is a more simplified experience, but they're looking also as well of, how do we keep our core customers? How do we keep those that have the highest lifetime or long-term value for our brands and for the products that they're buying in our stores? And so that's where I think they're placing their effort.
To go off of that, I'm thinking about In my next little question, I have elements of like loyalty and basket building and getting more consumers in the door, building their baskets, making them loyal over time. And for your shoppers that are already showing up in the door, how do you make them build a bigger basket than they are? What are some of the maybe more, let's say 1 to 3 year sort of assumptions that we're making when it comes to how retailers are going to continue to drive loyalty and basket building in such a competitive landscape, which probably ties back to unified and connected shopper experiences. But anything else?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, sometimes we make things so complicated, and a lot of it is just going back to the basics. It's those that can serve up a relevant offering in a timely manner where the consumer wants it to be, when they want it to be there. At the core, that really hasn't changed. And those that are doing well are really excelling on those sort of operational excellence principles. What has changed, though, is data clean rooms and the ability to measure and make better decisions to be able to do that operational execution. Yes. Is it going to get much more competitive? I think so. Yeah, there's more retail concentration, but also as well, when we're in an environment where there is economic uncertainty or where you have a lot of consumers that are seeking value, that are very price conscious, that always sort of ups the ante on competition. And so we expect to see more of that going forward. But I would just say, yeah, at the core, those that remember the principles of sort of operational excellence and how they win and build loyalty with their consumers over this time, they're doing it in the same way. They're just doing it with a much more tech and data forward approach than they could have in the past. And so I guess if you don't do that and you don't leverage those, then you get left behind.
And lastly, the main assumptions we're working with for brands.
One is convergence of retail and media into commerce. Been talking about it for a while, but that is something that, just given all these drivers, we know is already starting to happen, but will only be, further cemented really soon. The second is around, assumption around data clean rooms and audience targeting, just with the knowing the need and expectations around better audience insights, more actionable and accurate data measurement, things like that. And then lastly, it's really all about power and efficiency or efficacy of AI being embraced across the value chain. And so, yeah, we talk a lot about how AI could influence, we've talked about discovery and things like that, but it's also shaping product strategies. I mean, it's shaping everything end to end. And I think that's going to be really important for our brand partners.
Convergence of retail and media. That's a broad statement. Like, obviously it's going to happen. But for brands that read this, what is the next, okay, what do I do with that statement? Yep.
Yeah. So I would say two core things that are like the first things to be thinking about. First is, again, I go back to, if you're not structured right, and then you're not set up for success. And that's going to require a lot of change for a lot of our partners. You need to think about roles and responsibilities and budget ownership and traditional KPIs that will need to shift, because you have to have much more integrated strategic planning if these are converging together. You need to have a cohesive retail media strategy. I know it sounds basic, but role of shopper marketing even, looks a lot different. And so that, for me, sits at the core when I see the brands that are doing the best, moving the fastest. They are putting down the barriers of historical structures and design to think about what needs to change going forward. So that would be the first thing. That's a lot. It's not a simple thing to go execute, but the mentality and openness for change, I think, really enables us. The second thing that I would just say is JBPs. JBPs are going to have to evolve as this converges together. We're already starting to see this, but it's things like, what actually gets covered in a JBP? What are you measuring? Who even attends? You've got different people involved. What you're negotiating on looks different. Ties back to, again, these are all interrelated. We're talking about retailers and how they're operating as ecosystems, not just actually the retailing element of it. And you're seeing that play out for brand assumptions too, because of how they might need to respond. It is important to acknowledge for brands, it's a really tough time for them. You look at the last 18 to 24 months and they were growing a lot through price. And now they're being pushed to grow through volume and mix. And so they're trying to handle this and sort of manage the day-to-day and execute there while also flying the plane and rebuilding it too for what it needs to be for the future. So it's not an easy thing. It's not something that should be taken lightly, but yeah, it does need to happen in the next 5 years. I would say even less than that.
Alrighty, we have covered the STEEP framework that guides and grounds this report. We've covered some of the 32 drivers of change, and we've hit on a few of our big assumptions that help provide tactical ways to think about change across shoppers, brands, and retailers. Of course, if you want more from the report, now is the time to subscribe to Flywheel's Retail Insights platform. I promise, it's where you want to be to stay ahead.
Very last question for you. You know this one. I don't remember what you said in January, and I never look back. I should, because I just have to keep telling people I don't remember what you said. But something on your digital wish list that you have not purchased and why?
So I listened back to what I said in January because I was like, what did I say? I still haven't bought it. It was an inflatable axe throwing toy for my son,
right?
Which I do not have in our backyard still, fortunately. But on the same theme of things he wants, the other thing that is on our digital wish list is a massive sort of spiral slide to attach to the playground. He sees those at other playgrounds and wants one at the house. Maybe someday, but for now, it's going to stay on the digital wish list.
I like it. A massive spiral slide. I think it's like every kid's dream. It's just a big spiral slide. As long as it's not metal, because then it burns your legs off.
Then it would be, that's not fun for the summer. Yeah, no.
Dangerous.
No, so that's going to be there. The only other one that was on the list forever was one of those walking pads to go under the desk. I finally bought it. That was probably on my digital wish list for at least a year, and I finally pulled the trigger on it.
Do you like it? Are you using it?
It's still in the box. I mean, it should basically be on my digital wish list still. It's in the box in the garage, but at some point it'll come out.
That wraps up another episode of the Commerce Collective podcast. Thank you as always to Hannah for hopping on and sharing her insights. And I'm telling you, for the very last time, that you should go subscribe to the Retail Insights platform. You can do so by going to the flywheeldigital.com website. You can reach out directly to me. You can reach out directly to Hannah. You can do quite literally anything, and we will help you get subscribed to the Retail Insights platform. Okay, I've been your host, Emma Irwin, and we'll see you next time.